Wish Fairy Manhwa welcomes you. Your support means a lot. Subscribe the channel and name the manhwa that you want to reborn. Wish Fairy will grant it.
The story begins with an 8-year-old girl named Bersha. At her first meeting with her fiancé, Prince Cecil, she boldly declared that she was a villainess. Her role was to drive a wedge between the prince and the heroine, then be defeated and have the engagement annulled. In response to Bersha's grand declaration, Prince Cecil merely smiled softly. He showed no surprise or confusion, simply thinking silently that he didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Today was Bersha's first formal meeting, the only daughter of Prime Minister Notches and her fiancé, Cecil Glow Alphista, Crown Prince of the Kingdom of Alphista. The setting was formal, but the atmosphere turned odd because of Bersha's introduction. Cecil glanced at Bersha's maids and saw them trying to stifle their laughter. He guessed that these odd behaviors were probably normal for the girl. The other courtiers were equally bewildered. To ease the situation, Cecil smiled and suggested that Bersha sit down for tea and talk. Bersha, still in character, only responded with a puzzled huh. They went together to the tea table in the garden. Cecil calmly introduced his butler, Zeno, saying Bersha would meet him often in the future. Bersha obediently agreed, while her father kept reminding her to stay calm and find a way to handle trouble. While they sat facing each other, Bersha suddenly asked Cecil whether he too had been reincarnated into this world. She wondered why a child like him could be so composed. While butler Zeno was screaming inside that no 10-year-old should behave like Cecil, the prince calmly asked Bersha to explain what she meant by the words villainess and heroine she had used. Taken aback by the question, Bersha panicked and shouted that she would certainly become a woman worthy of being jilted, whatever the truth might be. Cecil merely gently pointed to the smear of cream on her face. Bersha began to explain that she had memories from a previous life. She had been an ordinary person in Japan, and this world was exactly like the autumn game she had played. Bersha went on to explain the game's scenario. According to it, Cecil would meet and fall in love with the heroine. She, in the role of the villainess, would become jealous and cause trouble for them. In the end, Cecil would become angry, annul the engagement, and ruin her family. That was the fate she was facing. Cecil listened in silence. He thought that suddenly annulling an engagement for such a reason was unrealistic, but what he cared about more was how Bersha would behave as a future queen while pursuing her script. Bersha loudly declared she would become a strong, noble, and beautiful woman who could face destruction with dignity. Cecil echoed her words with an amused smile. Cecil suddenly realized he had let his interest show. He quickly hid his smile, thinking to himself, oh no. Cecil's fleeting smile made Bersha blush in embarrassment, sweat pouring down. She didn't know how to react. Bersha explained that she wasn't simply a background character in the game. In her previous life, she had lived in seclusion, and it was the game's prince character who had helped her. Thus, in this life, she wanted to be by the prince's side to support him. And to accomplish that, Bersha shouted with all her determination that she would become a pure and righteous demon flower. With that, Bersha dashed off, declaring she would go train herself. Cecil could only watch her retreating figure with a puzzled expression. Zeno stepped forward and asked Cecil what he planned to do. He remarked that the prince's fiancé seemed ignorant of royal etiquette and was saying nonsense. However, Cecil smiled. He thought that Bersha's eccentricity was what mattered. He believed the girl wouldn't cause any serious problems and decided to keep observing her. Zeno noted that the prince seemed very amused by this unpredictability. Cecil replied by asking whether he wasn't just enjoying a new toy, his fiancé, like any other child. Zeno sighed, hoping the prince would enjoy it in a more childish way. Zeno teased that Cecil had left his childhood behind in the queen's womb. Cecil only replied that he was in a good mood and would let it slide this time. Watching Bersha's cheerful figure in the distance, Cecil smiled faintly and thought to himself, don't disappoint me. Time flew by. 1 year had passed since that fateful meeting. Cecil and Zeno were sipping tea when Zeno remarked that Miss Bersha had indeed not disappointed the prince. Cecil agreed, admitting that she not only hadn't disappointed him, but kept delivering delightful surprises. Zeno also wondered whether Bersha was healthy enough to visit the prince, since he had heard she suffered from a terminal illness. Hearing that, Cecil suddenly remembered that Marquis Notches, Bersha's father, had mentioned it as well. Just then Bersha's father, Marquis Douglas Ibel Notches, appeared. Seeing the prince, he hurriedly bowed. Cecil asked after Miss Bersha's condition, saying he'd heard she was ill and couldn't visit. Marquis Douglas broke into a sweat and stammered that, in truth, his daughter suffered from an incurable case of stupidity. While Zeno worried, Cecil seemed to grasp the situation. Cecil revealed he had asked acquaintances to check and learned that Bersha was perfectly healthy. Those reports had kept him from feeling bored during their time apart. Meanwhile, a servant informed Miss Bersha of the prince's presence. A year had passed. Bersha, now 9, appeared and greeted Cecil. He smiled teasingly and asked whether she had forgotten who he was. Bersha once again theatrically introduced herself as the prince's fiancé 9. Zeno observed she changed quite a bit. Cecil recalled reports that she ran around the mansion every day as training. Those reports were entirely true. Bersha had been diligently training, even doing odd exercises like bunny hops up the stairs. Bersha proudly asked Cecil if he noticed her change, but immediately after, she clumsily tripped. Seeing his daughter, Marquis Douglas grabbed her and scolded her for such thoughtless behavior in front of the crown prince. However, Cecil said that childish side of hers was truly endearing. Cecil's compliment left Bersha stunned. She blushed and stammered, asking the prince if he could say it again. Marquis Douglas hurriedly warned his daughter not to be deceived by the prince's appearance. He insisted Cecil was cold and that the praise was mere flattery. Cecil merely thought that the Marquis was ruder than Bersha. As the Marquis moved to dismiss the visitor, Cecil stopped him, saying he wanted to speak with Bersha about her birthday party the next day. The Marquis was taken aback. The Marquis continued to put his daughter down, calling her foolish, rude, and inexperienced, and begged the prince to overlook her. Cecil wondered whether this was the way the Marquis expected him to excuse Bersha's behavior. Cecil beamed brightly and said it was fine. After all, Bersha was his fiancée 9. The remark silenced the Marquis, while Bersha was overjoyed. Bersha happily thanked the prince, took his hand, and led him to the prepared tea. As they sat at the tea table, the shawl on Bersha's shoulder suddenly twitched. It was a small fox she called Kuro. Bersha hastily apologized, explaining she'd found it and it wouldn't leave her, so she disguised it as a shawl. Cecil realized it was a real fox and felt that something was peculiar. Cecil found the whole thing rather amusing. He said he would speak to the Marquis to request permission for Bersha to keep the fox. He also advised her to bring it along next time as a normal pet rather than as a shawl. When the pastries were served, Bersha momentarily frowned at her dieting regimen, but a maid cleared her throat, reminding the girl of the plan. Bersha quickly composed herself and presented Cecil with a special low-sugar pastry. She explained that knowing the prince disliked sweets, she'd prepared it especially, part of her plan to become a villainess. Cecil tasted the pastry and complimented it. Bersha was so delighted she forgot her act, her cheeks flushing. Cecil thought her personality and words were completely at odds with the role she aimed for. Emboldened, Bersha confidently declared that at tomorrow's party, she would become a top-tier villainess worthy of pairing with the prince. Her confident words left Cecil feeling a little uneasy. Cecil offered one piece of advice. From now on, she should keep her memories of her previous life and her plan to become a villainous secret. A true demon flower would never reveal any weakness. Bersha immediately understood. She cheered that defeating an opponent without showing any flaw was class, while courting disaster herself was third-rate. Cecil was glad she got it, even if something felt slightly off. Delighted by the title Fiancé 9E, Bersha happily promised to perform her role perfectly so she could be convincingly defeated. Cecil only smiled. Amused by it all, he nonetheless felt he needed to tell her a few important things. He abruptly changed the subject, mentioning that tomorrow was his 11th birthday and he was looking forward to celebrating it with her. Bersha was surprised by the unexpected news and began muttering calculations. Bersha murmured, recalculating time. The prince would be 11 tomorrow while she was only 9. That meant next year she'd be 10, exactly when the game's heroine would appear. But Cecil cut off her train of thought with earth-shattering news. The heroine she was expecting would attend the party tomorrow. Not stopping there, Cecil revealed an even more horrifying detail. The heroine's main motive in the game was to avenge her mother's death, and that mother was none other than Bersha's. The brutal truth struck, turning Bersha's game into tragedy. She screamed in despair, my mother will die." With tears in her eyes, Bersha told Prince Cecil about the game's future. She revealed that next summer a plague would break out in the capital, and her mother would die just before Bersha's 10th birthday. Cecil listened calmly and asked to confirm the details. Bersha explained further that it was an old disease that had mutated, making treatment difficult to develop quickly. Additionally, a shortage of the herb Ruona, a crucial ingredient, caused many to perish. Cecil pondered the herb, nodding it was hard to cultivate and not widely stocked. She recounted miserably how her father had tried to find Ruona for her mother but failed. Desperate, he begged the king to share some from the national reserves but was refused. The king could not give special treatment to one person while countless others suffered. In the end, her mother did not survive. Bersha revealed that after this tragedy, her father became a cruel villain. He perhaps understood but could not accept the harsh truth. Cecil listened with a troubled expression as he learned the source of his future father-in-law's change. Cecil pointed out an important fact. That event would occur a year from now, so why not prepare now to save her mother? He bluntly asked whether the plot was more important than her mother. Bersha was left speechless by the sudden question. Bersha broke into sobs. She feared that changing the plot would affect Cecil. This revealed her deep inner conflict, wanting to save her mother while fearing to alter the predetermined future. Cecil gently handed Bersha a handkerchief. He smiled reassuringly, reminding her he was her fiancé and that they could think together and find a solution to this difficult problem. At that moment, Bersha's father, Marquis Notches, suddenly burst in. He hastily thanked the prince for keeping Bersha company and urgently urged his daughter to go home before she did anything rash. Bersha gripped her father's hand and firmly declared that she didn't care if the family might be ruined by deviating from the plot. She would not abandon saving her mother. Marquis Notches was astonished. The Marquis, panicked, turned to Cecil and anxiously asked whether His Highness was also plotting to ruin his family. Contrasting that panic, Cecil merely wore a confident, enigmatic smile. After the meeting, Cecil and his attendant departed. Having heard Bersha's full story and resolve, he decided he needed to meet with the king. Cecil outlined a plan. He knew his father always fretted over birthday gifts because he never asked for anything, so he would use the opportunity to request access to the greenhouse and some Ruona seedlings. He knew this would be an intriguing challenge, especially if Bersha's claims were true. The attendant looked astonished at the young prince's calculation. Cecil continued thinking. He would need to study how to cultivate the plant and its properties, possibly hire an expert, and order more books if the library lacked sufficient material. The camera zoomed in on Cecil's sharp eyes. He thought to himself that the world was dull because he could succeed at anything on his first try. Cecil realized that he had never felt joy from accomplishing anything before because everything was too dull, but the happiness he felt now came from his adorable, unpredictable fiancé. He felt he should thank Bersha for that. Time flew. A year had passed. The scene was ironic. Bersha was furious, shouting in Cecil's face, "Your Highness, how could you?" In response to her rage, Cecil simply tilted his head and smiled gently, replying with a nonchalant "Ahem." Bersha writhed on the sofa in a tantrum, her little fox spirit at her side. Meanwhile, Cecil calmly sipped his tea, wondering if she calmed down if he just waited a bit. Bersha cried as she explained. She apologized for her improper behavior but said today was her 10th birthday. She kept her promise not to tell anyone about her past life, so the only person she could confide in about her mother was Cecil, but he hadn't come to see her, which made her extremely anxious. Cecil looked at Bersha with gentle eyes. He apologized, admitting he hadn't realized she was so upset. He explained that the letters he'd written really meant that everything was fine. Bersha burst into joy. She sobbed, saying that summer had arrived with no epidemic and her mother was still healthy. But she also felt helpless because she tried to gather Ruona herb and hadn't collected enough, and now didn't know what to do. Cecil smiled to reassure Bersha. He revealed a shocking truth. Don't worry, the epidemic does occur, it's just that it doesn't spread much. Bersha was stunned into silence. Cecil explained that thanks to Bersha's information a year earlier, he had been able to prepare an antidote. He predicted where the outbreak was likely to occur and treated the sick immediately, thereby containing the disaster. He handed her a vial of the medicine as a precaution, leaving Bersha completely bewildered. Everyone in the room was shocked by this truth. Bersha stood speechless. Amid the confusion, Cecil said, "The one who treats me like this is you alone, Bersha." The remark made her even more flustered and eager to know the whole story. Cecil tried to calm the highly agitated Bersha. She demanded an immediate explanation. He suggested they start the story from just after they had spoken about her mother a year before. The scene shifted back a year. After the king granted permission to use the greenhouse, Cecil and his attendant left. The attendant remarked that the king seemed relieved he no longer had to worry about a birthday gift for the prince. Cecil immediately decided to go to the library to research the Ruona herb. At the library, after studying, Cecil said he understood the basics and wanted to experiment with a few things. Both understood it wouldn't be easy, but Cecil was determined to begin. Sometime later, the attendant brought botanists to the greenhouse at Cecil's request. All were stunned by the sight. Cecil's face looked a bit tired, but his eyes still shone with resolve. The botanists couldn't believe their eyes. A giant Ruona shrub, far larger than its normal size. They wondered if it was some mutated variant. Cecil calmly explained he'd simply tried a different cultivation method and was willing to share his notes. While the scientists rejoiced at the great discovery, Cecil thought privately that it hadn't been that hard to succeed. With the cultivation solved, he decided the next step was to formulate the medicine and to ask the king to hire tutors, since books alone wouldn't suffice. The story interwove with Bersha's thoughts from a year earlier. She told herself the first thing to do was identify her mother's illness. No matter how minor the symptoms, she wanted to know everything so she could help. Returning to Cecil's research, he worked tirelessly in the library. His teacher said he was wonderful and had nothing more to teach. Cecil thought to himself that now he only needed to find a disease fitting Bersha's description. Cecil's eyes lit up. He had found it. In the laboratory, he explained to Zeno that thanks to Bersha's information, he had narrowed the possibilities and believed there was a reason the disease mutated and required the Ruona herb. And then they succeeded. A vial of red medicine sat on the table. The attendant exclaimed in amazement, "You really did it." Cecil confirmed, but added that its effectiveness couldn't be known without trying it on someone. Cecil reflected that it wasn't that difficult. He did it all out of curiosity, assuming what Bersha said was true. But he knew that to get adults to act, he needed to create a coincidence, since no one believed Bersha's past life story. And this is how Cecil manufactured the coincidence. He pretended to casually take an interest in a certain disease, then invited a doctor researching it to the palace to tutor him. Everything was arranged deftly. Next, he happened to mention the Ruona herb he was cultivating and its effects. The rest was left for the doctor to discover the connection between the disease and the herb himself. The doctor burst out laughing, saying the research might help an acquaintance of his. The attendant noticed he seemed oddly pleased to see the prince in trouble. Cecil couldn't understand why Zeno hadn't recognized such a simple thing. Zeno asked, "And then what?" Cecil only thought to himself that, being a competent physician, Zeno would realize it sooner or later. Finally, the doctor cried out in excitement when he made the connection. Ruona herb can be used against that mutated disease. It's very possible. Cecil smiled inwardly, thinking, at last he understands. Everything was set. Cecil suggested Zeno assist the understaffed royal clinic, and Zeno agreed. Then the first patient with symptoms appeared at that clinic and was treated by Zeno. The flashback ended. Cecil admitted that despite his careful preparations, he was still surprised the patient actually showed up. He hadn't fully believed Bersha, but in the end he learned a lot and many people were saved, so everything turned out fine. Bersha remained puzzled. She couldn't understand why Cecil had gone to such lengths. Cecil blamed his bad habit of thinking too quickly and skipping explanatory steps, which had caused Bersha's worry. He resolved not to ignore his fiancée 9 when she was anxious. Bersha still couldn't believe an 11-year-old could accomplish such extraordinary things. Cecil replied that a normal child couldn't, but he was a prince. He could use the royal library and ask his father the king to hire the best experts. From outside, Zeno's voice drifted in, praising Cecil. Cecil turned to reassure Bersha, saying she needn't worry about the details. The important thing was her mother was fine and the casualty count had been kept to a minimum. Bersha slowly accepted it, thinking about his nickname, Android Prince. Bersha snapped awake and cheerfully cried, "That's right, everyone was saved from the epidemic, so it's all okay." It seemed she had decided not to dwell on the complicated details anymore. Cecil said he had a more formal gift for her. The reason he hadn't been able to see her recently was because he'd been dealing with the epidemic, and making this gift had also taken time. He opened a box to reveal a sparkling heart-shaped object. Bersha was astonished. There was yet another surprise. It was a heart-shaped pendant. Cecil explained it was not just a gift, but a byproduct of the medicine-making process, a kind of universal antidote. He revealed that during his library research he had found an important book. Thanks to it, he had refined the Ruona herb, producing not only an antidote, but also a way to enhance the potency of other medicines. Bersha was completely bewildered. A universal antidote, Cecil smiled and confirmed the blue liquid inside was the medicine and assured her it worked very well. To prove it, he cheerfully added that he'd tested it on himself. Being naturally toxin-resistant, he increased the dose without harm, ending his unexpected explanation. Cecil revealed in his thoughts that during his research, he had also accidentally discovered a secret room in the library. A mysterious smile spread across his face, signaling another plot. In a short flashback, Cecil was inspecting the stacks in the library. He noticed an area that seemed off. Where there should have been empty space, there was a wall. He found a hinge, pressed it, and part of the wall moved. Inside was a strange rotary cipher lock. Cecil reasoned that a place hidden so carefully must contain forbidden books. He figured that if it was reserved for the royal family, the cipher key was likely something his father, the king, had chosen. Cecil quickly cracked the code. He thought that no matter how much the king loved the queen, her birthday was information anyone would know. He entered the date and the secret door opened. He mischievously decided not to tell his father he'd gained access. Back in the present, Cecil fastened the necklace on Bersha. He explained that because she would be his wife in the future and someone might target her life, he made it as a protective charm. He complimented that it suited her very well. Bersha blushed, completely flustered by Cecil's actions and words. She stammered a thank you. Cecil simply smiled, pleased by her adorable reaction. Cecil's thoughts revealed a darker truth. That medicine was actually very troublesome. In the process of resolving the Ruona herb's compatibility issues to create the cure, it also produced an ultimate toxin. Although it could save people, it had too many drawbacks. He decided to give it only to Bersha as a gift. Cecil put a finger to his lips, asking Bersha to keep the necklace a secret. He silently prayed it would act as a shield for his fiancée, whom he regarded as his toy. Bersha hurriedly promised to keep it secret. Bersha was deeply moved. She looked at Cecil with bright, trusting eyes, completely believing in his kindness. Completely misunderstanding Cecil's intention, Bersha clenched his hand, more determined than ever. She solemnly swore on the necklace to repay his favor by steering the plot back on course and becoming a true female villain. Cecil could only be silent, thinking, what? Bersha enthusiastically declared her plan. First, she would lead her father down the path of evil, then ensure Cecil and the heroine had a happy ending, and she even promised to spectacularly destroy the Notch's family. Cecil could only helplessly think that she wasn't listening to him at all. Faced with Bersha's enthusiasm, Cecil just smiled silently. As she raised her hand and chanted, "I'll do my best," Cecil found the situation amusing. In the mansion courtyard, a man bowed to Lord Notches. Behind a wall, Miss Bersha, the Lord's daughter, was secretly watching with a scheming expression. Bersha thought to herself, the mission begins, with a mischievous face. Meanwhile, her father, Lord Notches, had a splitting headache as if he sensed the troubles about to come. The scene shifted to an outdoor tea party. Prince Cecil remarked that Lord Notches looked tired. He thought to himself that it had been a year since the epidemic, and a year of Bersha constantly trying to turn her father evil. Lord Notches complained to Prince Cecil that he felt ashamed because his daughter, Bersha, kept urging him to do wicked things like embezzlement and fraud. Recently, she even prepared a book for him titled, How to Become a Great Villain. Prince Cecil showed interest and asked to see the book. It was a criminal handbook, complete with illustrations comparing income from honest work versus after cheating. Cecil remarked that the book was well presented, easy to understand, and entertaining. Cecil flipped through the book and pondered. The figures on the types of crimes were presented so vividly it seemed as if Bersha relied on knowledge from her past life. He decided he needed to confirm this with her. Cecil thought to himself that even though he knew what Bersha had been up to for the past year, he still felt a bit guilty for not stopping her, which had aged Lord Notches noticeably. He found her goal of turning her father into a criminal odd, but if she pursued something else she might become famous. What a wasted talent. Prince Cecil supposed that perhaps Bersha was just in her rebellious adolescence, attracted to men with bad tendencies, and did it out of love for her father. He decided to try to help. Meanwhile, Lord Notches wondered why his daughter targeted him instead of the prince. Cecil smiled smugly, thinking that maybe Bersha didn't need to turn him evil because he already exuded a vile aura. He felt such actions suited a dashing older man like Lord Notches more than a boy like him. He almost said that out loud. Cecil turned and noted that even Zeno, standing behind him, was nodding repeatedly. Lord Notches awkwardly said that he'd been exhausted lately and had spoken rudely, even almost telling His Majesty to stop praising the Queen and do your job. He wondered what his daughter and the prince thought of the royal family. Bersha complained that her father stubbornly refused to become a villain. Cecil thought to himself that their complaints sounded identical. Perhaps Bersha's temperament was inherited from her parents rather than from a past life. Lord Notches suddenly remembered and voiced his concern about the upcoming debutante ball for the prince and his daughter. He asked Cecil to keep an eye on the girl. Cecil agreed and said he might let her have free rein if things seemed entertaining. Finally, the day of the ball arrived. Bersha and Cecil appeared splendid. Cecil wore a white knight's uniform and Bersha a pure white dress. They complemented each other's outfits. However, Bersha thought it a waste to be dressed so beautifully only to serve as someone else's background. Bersha was fixing her appearance, eager for the party to begin. Cecil looked at her and wondered when he had started finding her genuinely cute and beautiful. He remembered that at their first meeting he only praised her to win favor, but now his feelings were different. He realized her skin, hair, slender figure, everything was the result of effort. Prince Cecil smiled gently, thinking to himself, "You really have become truly charming." Caught off guard by the compliment, Bersha flustered. She brushed it off, saying it wasn't the time for sweet words. The plan to make her father evil may have failed, but her real plan would begin today. Cecil only thought inwardly, still disappointing on the inside as always. Bersha suddenly remembered and turned to scold her father for giving the book How to Become a Great Villain to the prince. Hearing that, Cecil recalled that he had been the one to find the book on the floor and place it on Zeno's bed as a childhood prank. In retrospect, he felt the act had been a bit excessive. Cecil took the opportunity to ask Bersha whether the book's contents were entirely from her past life knowledge. Bersha cheerfully admitted part of it was, but the other half came from asking people she knew. Cecil thought this rather risky and decided to question her more thoroughly after the party. At that moment, a servant announced the party was about to begin. Bersha and Cecil then entered together. The lavish scene of the party appeared with numerous noble guests. Prince Cecil and Bersha walked side by side, drawing every gaze. A small frame showed another couple, seemingly an image from the game Bersha knew, featuring a blindfolded young man and a girl. Prince Cecil thought to himself that although Bersha's goal was to become an evil beauty, she still studied very diligently. He judged that aside from being a bit overactive, her behavior wasn't problematic. Meanwhile, Bersha was speaking with Viscount Raleigh Consafty. An elderly, balding viscount approached and praised Bersha for looking cuter than usual today, even patting her head. Bersha happily thanked him. From afar, Prince Cecil narrowed his eyes, displeased to see someone familiar acting so intimate with his fiancée. Immediately, Cecil smiled and stepped forward to link arms with Bersha, saying he had something to discuss privately with the Viscount. Then he took Bersha's hand and told the Viscount she felt unwell and would rest for a while. Without many words, Cecil grabbed Bersha's hand and pulled her out of the ballroom to the astonishment of everyone. Bersha panicked and called after him, "W8, Your Highness, Prince Cecil." He led her into an empty room and closed the door. Turning to face Bersha, Cecil asked seriously, "Now, give me an honest answer. I'm about to find an important clue." Cecil immediately asked whether Viscount Raleigh Consafty was the one who had provided the information for the book. Bersha, astonished at being guessed correctly, admitted that when the Viscount had visited her father earlier, she remembered him as one of the people who would make her father villainous in the game. Bersha innocently recounted that after flattering him and looking at him with sparkling eyes, she had sat on his lap. Taking advantage of that moment, he confessed all the wicked things he had done. Cecil thought inwardly that he couldn't believe the old man had so readily revealed secrets to a child. Cecil thought that the Viscount hadn't even realized he had fallen into a perfectly sweet trap. He turned to tell Bersha the harsh truth. Viscount Raleigh Consafty was actually a pedophile, a pervert who took children as objects of gratification. Bersha was horrified. Cecil asked whether the man had touched her. Bersha suddenly recalled his actions, hugging her, saying she looked like a doll, stroking her legs. He had also sent many letters and wanted to meet her alone. Bersha's face went pale with fear as she realized the truth. Bersha let out a terrified scream and collapsed to the floor in horror. Cecil thought to himself that the Viscount always pretended to be a man who loved children, so it was no wonder Bersha had been deceived. Cecil knelt down, holding the trembling Bersha to comfort her. He reassured her that everything would be fine and that he would handle it all. He ground his teeth, determined not to let anyone lay a hand on his fiancée 9E unpunished. While Bersha still sobbed, Cecil gently asked whether she could tell him who else she had come into contact with so he could protect her better. This was how he extracted more information from her game. Bersha said that in the game, her father was also seduced by Count Conmoruno and Baron Saghir, but she hadn't had the chance to meet them. Cecil understood inwardly that she planned to meet them tonight and let them get close to her father. Cecil told Bersha to avoid such dangerous actions in the future. Bersha, still frightened, agreed and promised to be more careful. However, she did not abandon her villain path, which made Cecil sigh, hoping she would give it up entirely. With renewed determination, Bersha declared she must do her best to ensure a bright future for the prince. She told him not to worry. Once she allowed those men to meet her father, she would run away immediately. Cecil was speechless at her naivety. Saying that, Bersha hurried out of the room, saying she would return after she was exhausted. Cecil only said, "Take care," then turned away, thinking he couldn't let any part of this go unchecked. After Bersha left, Zeno, Cecil's attendant, appeared. Cecil ordered Zeno to secretly summon Lord Notches here immediately. Cecil thought to himself that this incident was a perfect opportunity to purge the country's scum. He instructed Zeno to handle it discreetly so Bersha wouldn't notice, while he began to write a letter. Soon after, Lord Notches rushed in, anxious and asking what had happened to his daughter. Zeno handed the letter to the Lord. Cecil calmly invited him to sit and said they needed to discuss an important matter. Cecil began his plan, saying he had heard rumors about misconduct by Count Conmoruno, Baron Saghir, and Viscount Raleigh Consafty, as well as their attempts to approach the Lord. Cecil then delivered the decisive blow, saying that in fact Viscount Consafty had approached Bersha and that the man's behavior. Lord Notches fell silent upon hearing the news. Lord Notches exploded with anger, shouting, "Unforgivable." Cecil quickly soothed him, explaining that the man had only touched the girl a little but had a sick fixation on children. He added that Bersha had cried and trembled, that it was a horrifying experience, so it was best not to mention it to her. Cecil suggested that only the two of them know about the incident and asked for the Lord's cooperation. He proposed that Lord Notches, as the person the culprits were trying to approach, act as a spy to gather evidence of their crimes. Cecil asked if Lord Notches would help and said he had reported the plan to his father, the king. Lord Notches, seething with rage, immediately agreed without hesitation. Lord Notches clenched his teeth, veins bulging in his fists, and roared, "I will tear those filthy worms to pieces." Cecil thanked the Lord for his help and suggested they leave before Bersha returned so as not to trigger painful memories for her. After Lord Notches left, Cecil thought to himself that preparations were complete and there should be no problems. Cecil sat alone, reflecting. He thought his fiancée 9 had been rather mischievous lately and that he'd need to keep an eye on her for a while. He also realized he'd be living in Halm Academy's dormitory afterward and could only see her again in half a year. Time passed. Half a year later at Halm Academy. Cecil thought life here was likely to be very dull. As expected, Cecil stood in the schoolyard with a bored expression. He thought to himself, how boring. Walking around the campus, Cecil realized something he'd known before. It's truly dull without Bersha by his side. Suddenly, a familiar, excited voice called his name, Prince Cecil. Cecil and those around him were stunned. This was the boys' dormitory, where even female students weren't allowed, let alone outsiders, yet Bersha was running straight toward it. As Bersha approached carrying something in her arms, Zeno anxiously asked Cecil what to do. Although secretly pleased, Cecil ordered Zeno to act as if this were a hallucination and prepare to handle the rumors. Then he turned to Bersha with a composed smile and asked why she had come. Bersha, eyes brimming with tears, stared at Cecil and stammered, "Aya, a baby." Hearing that, Cecil froze for a moment. Then, instead of panic, a delighted, mischievous smile spread across his face, signaling that another entertaining performance was about to begin. At Helm Academy, a prestigious school for noble children, Prince Cecil Alphista was conversing with his attendant. He found school dull. His real goal was to recruit talented people to serve him. Just then, a servant brought the prince a letter. Prince Cecil smiled as he read Bersha's letters. He found it amusing how her emotions were laid bare in each line. Especially charming to him was her delighted reaction when she mistakenly thought the Lord's secret activities meant he was turning evil. Chaos erupted at the academy. In the crowd, Bersha was causing an uproar, shouting that she was pregnant. The prince thought that although he was bored, he had never wished for such a chaotic spectacle. Prince Cecil stood still, calmly observing with an amused smile. After reading the letter, Bersha's maids hurried away, leaving her alone with the prince. Cecil was somewhat displeased. He wondered why they so often left him and Bersha alone and decided he'd need to speak to them about it. Contrary to her usual composure, Bersha, the prince's fiancé 9E, was sobbing. Through tears, she said she felt both happy and worried, which left Cecil flustered. Others whispered among themselves, surprised that Cecil could make a girl cry like that. Cecil felt his mind go blank, his heart racing and a cold sweat breaking out. He couldn't understand what was happening. It was the first time he'd been put in such an awkward situation. Cecil panicked at the thought that if he didn't resolve the misunderstanding immediately, a terrible rumor would spread across the academy. The 13-year-old crown prince had gotten his fiancée 9E pregnant. To prevent disaster, Cecil held Bersha tightly and demanded she explain clearly. "Miss Bersha, can you tell me who is pregnant with whose child?" Bersha, in her panic, could only stammer incoherently. Cecil tried to remain calm and gently asked Bersha again, saying he couldn't help if he didn't know what had happened. Faced with the prince's tenderness, Bersha grew even more flustered. Bersha quickly apologized for her clumsy outburst, but Cecil wasn't satisfied. He stepped closer, smiling suggestively and emphasized each word. "So who is pregnant and whose child is it?" At last the truth came out. Bersha innocently replied, "Your Highness, of course it's my mother who is pregnant with my father's child." It turned out to be a terrible misunderstanding. Realizing she caused a huge misunderstanding, Bersha hurriedly explained she wasn't pregnant. Cecil whispered to his attendant that he still couldn't understand why Bersha had reacted so strongly just because her mother was pregnant. Cecil quickly ended the matter, reassuring everyone it had been resolved. He then shot a sharp look at the remaining attendant, warning them not to let any rumors spread. Cecil offered to send Bersha back to the Notch's mansion in his carriage so they could talk on the way. He seemed intent on learning more about his fiancée 9E's strange reactions. Bersha declined, saying she had her own carriage. She also noted that the distance from the academy to the Notch's mansion was very far, about a 2-hour carriage ride. Cecil smiled at Bersha's embarrassment, thinking he couldn't resist teasing her. Meanwhile, Bersha felt utterly mortified and just wanted to leave quickly. Cecil stepped closer, embraced Bersha, and whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, once we're alone we might even share our first kiss." The prince's words stunned Bersha. Unable to bear it, Bersha broke free and fled at full speed. Cecil could only watch her go and call out in helpless frustration. Cecil explained to Zeno that Bersha's reaction had been too adorable, so he couldn't help teasing her. He also decided from now on to call her by the pet name Bersha. Cecil and Zeno decided to follow Bersha. They knew she wouldn't abandon her maids, so they just needed to wait by the carriage. On the carriage, Zeno wondered what Bersha was worried about. Cecil explained that, based on what he'd read in Bersha's letter and in the game, she feared things would go awry if her soon-to-be-born sibling was a boy. Cecil recalled Bersha mentioning strange terms like coutier and flag. He understood that if her sibling were a girl, it would be fine, but if it were a boy, it would be a different matter. Cecil decided he needed to speak with Bersha that very day to learn why and help ease her worries. Zeno smiled, nodding that Bersha was the only one who could draw such varied expressions from his usually composed prince. Zeno teased whether Cecil enjoyed unexpected events like this, and the prince admitted they were good for killing time. However, Zeno also reminded him that it would be Cecil who would have to clean up any strange rumors if anything happened. They arrived at the Notch's mansion. The Marchioness, Bersha's mother, personally greeted Prince Cecil and thanked him for coming to congratulate the family. Cecil politely returned her greeting and offered his congratulations. He thought to himself that Bersha was very beautiful, and her deep red hair clearly came from her graceful mother. Then Bersha happily introduced her newborn brother, Ains, to Cecil. Although the boy looked utterly adorable with chubby cheeks, Bersha couldn't hide a worried expression as she braced for her upcoming concerns. Cecil looked at Bersha, still deep in worry. He suddenly realized she wasn't frightened because her brother was special, but because the boy's birth would affect the plot in her memories. Bersha's father, Lord Notches, suggested they take a short rest. Bersha turned and invited Prince Cecil to have tea while her brother Ains slept. Bersha's father hinted he wanted the two to speak in the garden, but Bersha thought it rude to interrupt the meeting of the betrothed. Cecil agreed that he wanted private time with her. He then proposed they go to his room and promised not to close the door. Bersha hesitated but agreed, and they left together. Cecil followed Bersha to her room. He was surprised to find it decorated very cutely and neatly, nothing like what he'd imagined for a female villain. Cecil suddenly remembered that Bersha often wore pale yellow or deep green dresses. He worried inwardly, wondering if she chose those colors because they matched his hair and eye color. With only the two of them, the atmosphere turned serious. Bersha looked very sad. The maids, having served tea, withdrew to leave them privacy. Bersha suddenly bowed her head and apologized to Cecil for the incident involving her brother. Cecil appeared puzzled. He didn't understand why she had to apologize and asked her to explain everything first. Cecil listened attentively. He partially understood Bersha's reasons, but deep down he still felt she was worrying too much over a silly thing. Bersha began explaining the plot in the game. According to it, the Notches family was supposed to adopt a relative who would also be a conquest target, but now a baby boy had been born, altering the plot. Cecil continued listening to the story about Courtgain Daraz Marden, who was meant to be adopted by the Notches. Despite his exceptional talent, he was mistreated by his foster father and forced into wrongdoing. After meeting the heroine, he fell in love with her but had to keep his distance. Bersha dreamily recalled Courtgain's route in the game, saying it was very tragic but also extremely romantic. Cecil could only sigh at her familiar, meaningless thoughts. Cecil suddenly asked Bersha why there were other targets who could end up with the heroine when she had previously said he would be the one to pair with her. Bersha was startled, realizing she'd forgotten to explain that the outcome could change depending on the heroine's actions. Cecil suggested canceling the engagement and pairing the heroine with someone else. She said that in other routes, the Notches family risked ruin, and she was willing to sacrifice herself so Cecil could be happy. Noticing Bersha deliberately avoiding the question, Cecil merely smiled. Bersha quickly changed the subject, saying that as long as Cecil became a better man and lived happily with the heroine, that would be enough. Cecil asked who his rivals were. Bersha excitedly replied that they were all candidates for his attendant positions. Cecil asked why she was so pleased, then added that he couldn't think of any woman more interesting than her. Bersha listed a string of names: Baldo Knockings, the eldest son of the captain of the knights; Charles Lionel, the second son of the Duke Lionel; Erdo Crum, the eldest son of the Minister of Foreign Affairs; and finally Prince Sean, Cecil's own younger brother. Cecil was astonished. Except for his younger brother who hadn't enrolled yet, the others were people he interacted with regularly. Bersha couldn't possibly know these things. Cecil realized he needed to take her memories seriously. Bersha continued to voice her worries. She believed events would self-adjust to fit the plot, and she feared some incident would force her family to adopt Courtgain, causing her brother Ains to suffer. Finally, Bersha managed to voice her fear. Cecil understood the issue. Bersha proposed a solution: simply have Courtgain enroll and become one of Cecil's attendants. Hearing that, Cecil beamed. He said he had an idea and told Bersha to leave everything to him. The scene shifted elsewhere. Courtgain Daraz Marden, a young man with an intellectual air but tired, was being harshly scolded by his superior. The man called him an idiot and said that's why he remained poor. The Lord continued to yell, berating Courtgain for still working. He sent him away and demanded he return the next day full of energy, a ridiculous request. The Lord's rage did not subside. He barked that if Courtgain wanted to finish the work he should hurry, then again sent him home. The young man could only apologize quietly. Courtgain left the office in silence. He heard others complain about the terrible Lord who only shouted and treated staff like tools. His face was heavy with sadness and helplessness. Courtgain wearily returned to his modest home. His mother hurried out to say a distinguished guest was waiting in his father's study. Courtgain wondered who would visit an ordinary family like theirs at this hour. Entering the room, Courtgain was stunned to see the guest was Prince Cecil himself. Beside him stood his attendant Zeno. The prince sat solemnly, introduced himself, and looked at Courtgain with a meaningful gaze. The prince called out Courtgain Dara's Marden's name and said he had come to speak with him, how this fateful meeting would change Courtgain's future and the kingdoms would be revealed in the next chapter. After hearing Bersha's story, Prince Cecil decided to personally investigate a young man described as cold-headed and very intelligent. Cecil explained to his attendant that, because the young man's family situation was difficult, he was working at a local public office. Cecil wanted to meet him in person to ensure things proceeded according to plan and to make it a test for the young man. At that moment, the man they sought appeared. He bowed and apologized for arriving abruptly, saying he had been very rude. Cecil, calm, invited him to sit. After sitting, the long-haired, bespectacled young man, Courtgain Dara's Marden, bluntly asked the prince what he wanted to discuss with him. Cecil smiled and explained that he had recently heard some complaints from local residents. During his inquiry, he discovered Courtgain was a distant relative of Bersha and had come personally to ask questions. Cecil teasingly remarked that Courtgain lied remarkably well, but Courtgain calmly replied that he simply hadn't told the truth. Cecil then asked about the local lord, who was Courtgain's father. Courtgain observed that his father was logical, but his sharp tongue was irredeemable, causing him to be seen as a tyrant and ruining his reputation. If that one aspect changed, he would be very respectable. Courtgain gave an example. Recently, a village head harvested crops early because he couldn't pay taxes. The lord said that if the man had come to negotiate, he could have granted more time. In 2 weeks, those crops would have been worth at least twice as much, allowing the villagers to live better. However, because of the lord's blunt and harsh manner of speaking things like "think a little, you fool," his good intentions were completely misunderstood. Cecil found the story quite amusing. Courtgain concluded that the problem lay not in his father's actions, but in how he conveyed his messages. The lord truly wished for the region's people to become prosperous, but his manner of speaking made everyone resent him. Cecil smiled with satisfaction. He quietly thought Courtgain was exactly as he'd learned. He had a good grasp of the situation. Cecil concluded inwardly, "You passed the test, Courtgain. My plan will go smoothly." After their talk, Cecil revealed he had another reason for coming, and this was the main one. They were investigating a noble for misconduct and had recently found a connection to another family that currently had no heir. Cecil looked directly at Courtgain and made a surprising offer. "I want that family to adopt you and for you to act as my informant." Cecil calculated silently that this was a plan that would kill 3 birds with 1 stone. Courtgain could not only spy for Lord Notches but also enroll in the academy, keeping the plot on track. Cecil also made it clear that the mission would put Courtgain in danger. In return, he promised to support and protect Courtgain's family. Cecil asked decisively, "What is your answer?" Courtgain fell silent, turned his back, and seemed to be weighing many things. Without hesitation, Courtgain knelt before Prince Cecil, demonstrating his absolute consent. Courtgain, moved, said he had thought he would have to give up all hope and live the rest of his life like this. He couldn't believe Cecil had chosen him, someone of such remote status he couldn't even be called nobility. With boundless gratitude, Courtgain Dara's Marden solemnly swore to serve Prince Cecil faithfully for the rest of his life. On the carriage ride back, the attendant asked in surprise whether the prince truly felt those things. Cecil only smiled wryly. He felt a bit guilty, perhaps because of what he'd heard about Bersha's past life. And so a new plan was set in motion, opening a new chapter at this grand mansion. Cecil met Bersha again. She happily reported that her father seemed to have reconciled with the villainous nobles, though in truth he was gathering intelligence. Cecil thought to himself that Courtgain had been adopted by a count and would attend Helm Academy as the plot required. He was truly an excellent candidate for the assistant role. Bersha excitedly declared that as long as they avoided the harem ending, everything would be perfect. She explained to a still bewildered Cecil the concept of the reverse harem, where one woman is loved and doted on by a string of men. Bersha continued to worry about the game's scenario in which, out of love, Cecil would fall for the heroine, but he flatly rejected it, saying he was only interested in loving one person. He also couldn't believe his friends would be attracted to a promiscuous woman and stressed that a princess's adultery would be considered treason. Seeing Bersha still doubtful, Cecil insisted he couldn't imagine that. He affirmed that none of them would be foolish enough to endanger the nation for a romance, though his expression carried a hint of mystery. Bersha went on with the hypothesis of charm magic, a kind of magic that interferes with the mind. Even though she believed it didn't exist in this world, she feared the heroine might possess an irresistible charm. Unexpectedly, Cecil interjected, asserting that magic did indeed exist, leaving Bersha extremely flustered. Cecil calmly confirmed once more, magic. Bersha was completely stunned by his assertion. Cecil elaborated, saying more precisely that it was power borrowed from spirits. Spirits are very rare and changeable. They allow only a few people to see them. Thus, they are treated as folklore, and the number of people with pacts to spirits is exceedingly small. Bersha was struck dumb. This was a secret few nobles even knew, though Cecil revealed that Lord Notches, her father, was among those who did. Bersha tried to sort her thoughts. If magic could attract people, perhaps a light spirit could do the same. Its healing light could purify wrongdoers, make them feel elated, and gradually lead to dependence. The thought of that dependence horrified her. Bersha shouted, "Then it's just a kind of drug." Cecil smiled and denied it, saying it wasn't a drug but a type of magic with very similar effects. Bersha refused to accept such an unromantic idea, but Cecil delivered an even more surprising blow. "Both of us, you and I, have signed pacts with spirits." Cecil realized Bersha truly didn't know. He found that impressive. Then he changed the subject and asked where she had found the fox Kuro. Bersha recounted that during her daily walks she often passed a stone structure like a torii gate and always saw Kuro sitting on it. It reminded her of the Inari shrine from her previous life, so she made Inarizushi. Kuro seemed to like it and followed her. She recalled her past life, when as a child she often went to a nearby shrine and was given Inarizushi by the priest and his wife. Cecil fell silent, thinking it all made sense now. His fiancé was not only a villainess but also a Zashikiwarashi, a luck-bringing spirit. Cecil asked when she had named Kuro. Bersha said that on the way home she once fell and Kuro licked her wound. That was when she decided to name it. At that moment Cecil revealed the truth. "You have forged a pact with a powerful dark spirit. A pact is formed by granting the spirit blood and a name." Bersha gaped, completely stunned by this earth-shattering revelation. The shock deepened when Cecil said there were people who couldn't see Kuro. He explained that the fox form was only a disguise, and a normal fox wouldn't hover or let her drape it around her neck. The fact that her maids could all see it was further proof. Then Cecil introduced the spirit who had made a pact with him, Zeno. Zeno is a king spirit whose primary elements are water and wind, though he can use other elements at intermediate levels. Bersha was left speechless by these incredible facts. Bersha stammered in disbelief. Cecil chuckled, saying he had no reason to invent this and that he was enjoying her reactions after having kept silent for so long. Suddenly Bersha exclaimed that a dark spirit sounded perfect for Villainess, but her excitement quickly deflated when Cecil added that dark spirits specialize in defense. That didn't suit a villain role at all. Cecil outlined the plan. The dark spirit's strong defensive magic could block the light spirit's influence, thus completely avoiding the reverse harem scenario. He asked Bersha if there was any animal near the heroine in the game that could be a light spirit. Bersha suddenly remembered. There was a small white bird the heroine had rescued as a child and brought to the academy. Cecil confirmed that it was indeed the one. The problem was solved. He said they would need to learn some magic before enrolling. Zeno also agreed. A huge stack of books was placed before Bersha. She asked in horror what they were. Cecil casually replied they were just a few books on spirits and he would have Lord Notches prepare the rest. Bersha stood frozen, desperately calling out Prince Cecil's name while he cheerfully waved and wished her luck. Cecil smiled to himself, thinking the autumn games Bersha described were truly extreme, where the heroine's romantic feelings were based on half-hearted brainwashing. At the Academy's opening ceremony, in a large auditorium, Prince Cecil, acting as student council president, gave a speech from the podium to all the students. Cecil expressed his delight at spending a beautiful day at the Academy with everyone. Below, the students, including young ladies and noble sons, listened attentively to his speech. The scene then shifted to a brief introduction. Charles Lionel, a friend of Cecil's, proudly spoke of his fiancée, Bersha Ibel Notches, age 13, who enrolled today. Cecil smiled and welcomed her and the new students to Helm Academy. In the student council room, Cecil's group of friends sat chatting. One of them remarked that although the other young ladies were wonderful, Bersha truly stood out. Cecil merely smiled and replied mysteriously, "Is that so?" Each of Cecil's friends had a different impression of Bersha. Valdo Knockings praised her beautiful legs and slim waist. Nelt Crumb, who looked gloomy, muttered that he wasn't suited to people like Bersha because they're scary when angry. Meanwhile, Sean Turquin Alphista excitedly said she's very pretty and will be his future sister-in-law, so he wanted to be friends with her. Charles turned to Valdo in surprise, teasing him that he didn't expect someone so focused on martial arts like Valdo to notice a girl. That fellow was still immature. Valdo eagerly explained that, for a noble young lady, Bersha had clearly trained hard to develop a supple body without any stiffness. Charles initially meant to ask which part of his fiancée Valdo was starring at, but then realized the man was actually very perceptive. Cecil thought to himself that Valdo was right and he should do something about Bersha's so-called diet, which was really a brutal training regimen. Cecil revealed that, according to reports from his people, Bersha still trained daily to become a proper villainess. Those assessments were the result of her efforts. He suddenly remembered and asked Courtgain, another group member, whether he had ever met Bersha since they were related. Courtgain Daraz Vladimir, formerly Courtgain Daraz Martin, answered coldly that his branch of the family was a lower-tier collateral line, so there was no way he could meet a main family member like Miss Bersha. He asked everyone not to bother him while he was working. Cecil thought quietly about Courtgain. He had been adopted by a count and was being groomed as Cecil's shadow. Since entering the academy, Courtgain had shown his abilities and was a potential aide. Cecil considered that a great discovery and silently thanked Bersha for it. An attendant informed Cecil that it was time. Charles immediately asked if Cecil intended to go meet Bersha. Cecil confirmed and said he had to leave at once, even though it was only 2:30. Charles was astonished because Cecil had never shown interest in anyone except when he needed to be pleasant. Cecil smiled and explained that wasn't true, he was only interested in interesting people. Charles pressed on, saying judging people by how interesting they are was so like Cecil, and asked if Bersha was special. Cecil replied that he would go see her himself and asked whether she was at the tea, since that was the tradition for new students. The tea was actually where high nobles displayed themselves while lower nobles tried to curry favor. Cecil asked Sean if he needed to prepare, since his tea was at 4. Sean cheerfully replied that he had rescheduled so he could meet Cecil first. Cecil thought to himself about how people lately called Sean's smile an angel's smile, while his own was the smile of a fallen angel. He didn't understand why there was such a difference when their faces were quite similar. Charles suggested everyone attend Miss Bersha's tea. He thought Nelt and Valdo also had childhood friends and fiancés there to congratulate her. Nelt worried that Silica would be upset if he didn't go congratulate her. Cecil perceptively noted that Nelt and Valdo had been with Miss Cynthia at the ceremony, so they were probably at the same table. Courtgain intended to decline, saying he would only be in the way. Cecil smiled and said it was fine, Courtgain should come along too. At this point, it would be better to bring everyone together. Courtgain was surprised but agreed. Charles complained that Cecil's reactions to him and to Courtgain were completely different. Cecil simply said it was a matter of popularity and urged everyone to go. On the way, the group teased Cecil, saying they were surprised his fiancée had enrolled this year as if he had forgotten. Cecil just smiled and told them to slow down. At the same time, his gaze dropped downward. From the balcony, Cecil and his friends looked down at the courtyard where they found a girl. Cecil's and Bersha's eyes met, each showing their own expression. Meanwhile, the girl was scolding her little bird affectionately, telling it not to fly too far. She glanced towards Cecil, who was calling Courtgain over to ask about the situation. Courtgain reported that Bersha was in the pavilion in the courtyard. The place was quite famous, and the attention she drew ranked only behind Prince Sean among the new students. Cecil and his group approached and saw Bersha from afar. She was standing with another girl wearing cat ears. Cecil recognized them. Cecil realized the cat-eared girl was likely Kuro, Bersha's familiar. He guessed Kuro had chosen that form as the most suitable to accompany Bersha on her enrollment. Cecil stepped forward and greeted them politely. Bersha, unprepared, jumped and stammered when she realized the person before her was the prince. Bersha was utterly flustered. She hadn't expected to meet the prince now, and he was accompanied by other student council members. Cecil simply asked nonchalantly whether they hadn't arranged to meet. Suddenly, a blonde young lady named Joanna pushed in, asking permission to speak with Prince Cecil for a moment. Cecil recognized her, Joanna of the Kurtzwarren dukedom, his and Sean's second cousin. She had been a candidate for his fiancé before he became betrothed to Bersha. Joanna smiled and told Cecil that Miss Bersha had actually been very worried about whether the prince would come. She kept looking around and then seeming disappointed. It was very endearing. Bersha panicked and shouted for Joanna to stop. She stammered denials, but Joanna only laughed and asked, "Oh, but isn't it all true?" Cecil remained silent, watching and wondering if Joanna was taking pleasure in teasing Bersha. To distract them, Bersha hurriedly boasted that, more importantly, while she hadn't been able to find the prince she had recruited, retainers. She proudly introduced her new friends, all young noble ladies. Cecil perceptively noticed Bersha had deliberately switched from friends to retainers. He thought that although it made her sound more villainous, it would be problematic if some of them ranked above her. Joanna also thought to herself that she should warn Bersha. Joanna gently corrected Bersha, saying that even if they were rivals, she shouldn't refer to her friends that way. She explained that they, as members of the Miss Bersha Admirers Society, were in a sense her retainers. Cecil was bewildered. The Miss Bersha Admirers Society, it was the first time he'd heard of such a thing. Joanna explained it was like an unofficial fan club. There were many reasons they had gathered, but ultimately it was because Miss Bersha was very popular. The other girls in the society chimed in. One said that watching Bersha made her feel healed. Another felt reassured being near someone who showed such kindness. Unlike high society people who only cared about status, Bersha could only blush at the praise. Cecil thought to himself that he had assumed Bersha was hiding flaws, but in truth she already had allies, more precisely protectors. He felt a little jealous, like seeing his pet spoiled by someone else. Zeno reminded Cecil that it was time to offer congratulations. Cecil called for Zeno and signaled him to bring it. Cecil stepped forward to Bersha, held out a stunning bouquet of black roses and said, "Bersha, congratulations on your enrollment." Bersha froze as she received the bouquet. She thought to herself that the meeting event had occurred after all, though the rose's color was a bit different from the game's. Bersha hurriedly refused, saying she couldn't accept something so precious since blue roses were the stuff of legend. Cecil gently explained it had been made especially for her. It was her favorite color and it was one of a kind. It wasn't blue, it was black. Bersha gazed at the black roses, and before she could stop herself, blurted that their hue was so deep it reminded her of the prince's eyes. Realizing what she'd said, Bersha hurried to correct herself, cheeks flushed, stammering that she simply liked that pretty blue color. Cecil only smiled enigmatically at Bersha's embarrassment, while her new friends giggled. Bersha secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Despite many departures from the game's script, she could relax knowing the important meeting event had occurred. Cecil, with his keen ears, immediately picked up the odd keyword and asked, "Did you just mention a meeting event? What's that?" Bersha went rigid, horror written across her face. She realized she'd accidentally voiced thoughts about the game's world. Her mind raced to find a distraction, any other topic to hide this fatal slip. To cover up, Bersha hastily changed the subject, asking Cecil whether on his way to the tea he had seen a cute girl playing with a bird. She described the girl as ditzy, laughing in a shrill voice, running around, talking to the bird, and looking around awkwardly, so much so that she had asked Courtgain to inform a teacher. Cecil calmly confirmed that he had seen a female student on the way. Cecil continued that he believed the girl had hair that was pink blended with gold. He said that seeing that hair made him think of how comforting Bersha's hair felt. Hearing this, Bersha grabbed Cecil in panic, shouting that this was an extremely serious matter. In Bersha's mind, the image of the pink gold-haired girl appeared. She realized in horror that this was the game's heroine, the woman fated for Cecil. The chapter ends with Bersha's utter shock, signaling a major upheaval about to occur.
Hi guys, your support means a lot. Please subscribe the channel and name the manhwa that you want to reborn. Wish Fairy will grant it.